the research on it, knowing whether something works for our kids or not. But it's nice to have either through the research later or in the manual itself, these special group studies published. Sorry.
Is there a preferred one to use? Like, are these just generally are these as a group the preferred ones to use for adaptive behavior?
These are the ones that have some published studies, okay? Either in the manuals, whenever they were developed, or after, okay? And they're widely used, okay? But there's new studies coming out all the time, okay? This is not to say that that you can't use those others. It's just if those others are used in assessments, you need to say that, like in your reports. You need to be able to say there's been no special group studies or no report. Therefore, you need to view these scores with caution. Okay, and it gives you a little more confidence whenever you're using these. Now, which ones? These are those of you who are more familiar with these. They measure different things. Okay, so depending on your kid, like the adaptive behavior measures, if you're really concerned about social skills, they may not have that same level of social skills as some of the other kids. Maybe some delays in like that. Remember we talked about last year, like theory of mind. Understanding. How others feel and think. Those kids in those, they may have more deficits in those areas, then adaptive behavior measures would be better to use. If there's more attention difficulties, then maybe some of those others, like the Connors and the Brief. Okay. Here, these are more global, what we call broadband instruments that can not only look at like attention, aggression, but also some of those internalizing problems like anxiety. Right. So different types of behavioral and emotional difficulties. That's what the BASC-2 measure. So it's depending on what you're looking for. Okay. Any other questions about some of these? All right. Then we'll move on. So this is what I love to talk about with observation techniques, okay? This is stuff that you're more familiar with, right? That you're using, right? As far as with FBA and to develop behavior plans. And I'll take some polls of like how much you use and how much you don't use, or what you use more than others. Now this, when we look at observation techniques, well, this just follows behavioral psychology a lot. It follows principles of behavioral observation, right? Okay? There's not specific tests, but not specific tests for a lot of them. There are some standardized behavior observation systems that kind of relate to like the BASC-2 and some other measures, but you don't need to use those. I mean, you can create a lot of things yourself by using good behavioral observation principles, right? And observation technique principles, okay? So that's the nice thing, that we don't need to be looking for specific tests and whether there was a norm sample or a special group study, It's like this works for the human population, okay? Including deaf, hard of hearing kids, which are part of that human population. So again, called more qualitative assessment, right? Not as much standardized testing, but very, very valuable, and more valuable in the sense that you can do frequent measurements, right? Which can more sensitively address like your progress in certain skills, right? Okay, so we're going to look at a few of these different things here, and then, like I said before, apply them to our case studies. I can already see you guys are ready to do some more activities, right? This is the research part of it and just the presentation part of it, but I'll be like sitting a lot later, so it's good. So you guys will be doing all the work. Okay, now let me take a poll. ABC analysis, how many do that as part of their FBAs? Like your ABC forms, antecedent behavior consequence, okay? So not everybody. This very popular assessment technique to use, behavior observation assessment technique to use, because it can be consistent with that functional analysis, looking at like what happened before, and then the behavior, and then that consequence is really important. Is that reinforcing, is that reinforcing the behavior to happen again, right? So that's where you're getting at, like what's that function of the behavior, what's reinforcing it, by like whatever happened, that consequence can be very critical, right? So that's how the ABC forms are good, because it fits right in with that functional relations. You can have tons of ABC sheets, right? You can have different observers, all the teachers filling out forms like on, in all the different classes on ABC, what happens. Or you can have the same observer filling out a whole bunch of things at different periods of time during the day and like across different days, okay? How many of you get like different teachers to like complete ABC forms and then you kind of collect them and then like just kind of analyze for patterns and things like that? No? How many of you just kind of do them yourself, like through like observation and just seeing, or multiple observations, seeing like what happens before, during, after? More yourself? Okay. All right. The behavior cards, how many of you use, and that's a pretty wide general statement, like either behavior cards like that have like color coding systems, like red, yellow, green, kids being on those types of systems, or, smiley face, frowny face, based on whether they showed the skill or not, right? Okay. So you can be pretty flexible in like how to do like behavior cards. And again, it's something that that can be good for tracking those low-rate behaviors. It may be tough whenever you're looking at very specific, like self-stim behaviors that are happening all the time. Hard to track those types of behaviors. But when you're looking at terms of like social skills or lack of aggression, like appropriate communication, some of those types of things where you can assess the kid's progress at different chunks of time through the day. These can be good to use. And again, you can use the functional relations looking at like what creates more smiley faces, right? If, the teacher's doing some specific thing, that's very reinforcing for the child, and then the kid engages in the skill you want, you can then see that functional relations, like that the teacher praises, right? And the kid's function is attention, right? And then the kid's hopefully going to get more of those, more smiley face behavior cards or more green lights or something. So it fits again right into that functional relations. Difficult with high frequency, which we talked about before. Okay. So what was the show of hands again? How many use behavior cards in some type of system, like to chart progress through the day? Yeah. And that you found that fits in more better with like the teacher with their classroom behavior management system, right? Usually. Scatter plot. How many of you use like scatter plot? Which can be nothing more, fancy way of just saying basically using like a, y and an x axis, and looking at how often the behavior you see is occurring across time. Okay, so you're just going to like chart little dots, See, the skill you want is a high level, and then the problem behavior maybe at a low level. That's all, what a scatter plot is. Okay, they can become more complicated, but that's really what you can use them for. Just kind of chart them, how many times the kid is showing the skill over certain times during the day or days in a row. So again, it shows that temporal or time relation between behavior and schedule-related events. And that can be powerful, right? Like if you're looking at like how often things occur for like period 1, period 2, period 3, and then you see a kid real spike in behavior over a certain amount of time during this one period, then you're knowing that that's an area that you want to maybe get in and do more prevention strategies, right? See what the teacher is doing to change the environment so that there's less problem behavior, more appropriate skill. See what's happening with what may be reinforcing that problem behavior in that area. So it's not quite as sensitive to know the functional relations just from looking at the graph itself. You know what I mean? You can get to that functional relations when then you go into the classroom and say, oh yeah, period 2, he's spiking, a lot of problems here. Now I need to go in there and find out how I can change the environment, what problem behavior. That's the functional relations part. But you can't really see it from the graph itself as much. You know? Okay. This stuff, I mean, you've had lots of different people talk, and like this stuff isn't like specific to deafness, but it's, again, used for everybody. For previous presenters here, have they gone over some of this stuff, like good observational techniques that you use to collect data? Right? Okay. All right, good. Event recording or frequency counts. How many of you use that? Okay, use that. Yeah, an easy way to do. You can do simple tallies on a paper. You do it to count a wide variety of behaviors. For specific, brief, and discrete, meaning behaviors that have a clear beginning and an end. You know, easy to be able to like frequently count that. How many of you not just do frequency, but then also put that in a time frame for rate data? Okay, like how frequently, like he was out of his seat 5 times within 2 minutes. You know, how many of you do that? Like within the, okay, that's good. Can be more meaningful so that you know a real specific parameter, especially when you're setting up behavioral goals to decrease, right? Because then whenever you monitor your interventions over time, you can go back in and see, all right, how can I, if a kid's doing it 5 times in 2 minutes, then we own a goal of like only like 1 or 2 times during that 2 minutes. And then you can track that through observations over time, okay, to see if your interventions are working. And also, students, that can be something that students can do on their own whenever they're keeping a track of, correct responses or putting up their hand without blurting out, and then they can challenge and do some self-monitoring on their own. Something can be used with event recording. All right, so next. How long? Duration recording. How many of you do that? And it may not be like, again, for the same kid, but just depending on whatever kid you're working with. Sometimes this will be more appropriate if there's a problem behavior happening for a long time. Has a beginning and an end, but that it may be continuous. Could use a stopwatch. It can be difficult sometimes to get a real specific, reliable recording. And what's recommended is more like that duration per occurrence versus total duration of occurrences. You know what I mean? Just like how long it's happening at one time. And then hopefully then you can chart and then see, based on your interventions, that the problem behavior is decreasing, right? That duration is decreasing over time. Okay. So this can be good for those like self-stim behaviors that may occur for a longer period of time. Okay, and then you want to hopefully decrease that amount of time and then extinguish them altogether. Next. Interval recording. How many of you use that? Like looking at, okay, some, where you're looking at specific intervals, whether a behavior exists or doesn't exist, okay? So you can use this for continuous or those brief discrete behaviors. And if it's rapid, happening a lot, like hand flapping, talking or signing during instruction, okay? And what you want to do here is that you divide like whatever your time period is, like a 10-minute time, into like equal intervals. And then you can use like on-off, like observe for like one period of time, 15 seconds, and then look down and then record it during the next 15 seconds, and then back up for another 15 seconds, observe, and then back down and record what you're seeing. So observe, record intervals, and then you can get not just like frequency of how many times it's happening, like over your overall observation, but then you can also get percentage data too, right? What's the percentage of time that they refrained from hand flapping, okay? And within these interval recordings, you can go more in depth, like looking at like whole interval and partial interval. Is that familiar? Have you been trained on that a little bit? Yeah? Okay. Where, again, for like those like continuous behaviors, whereas you would only record if they had been like doing like that flapping throughout that whole, like the whole interval of like 15 seconds, okay? And a partial interval is only if you want to record just a brief behavior if it happened just one time during those 15 seconds, no matter how brief it was, okay? So you can use those different sensitive observation techniques within interval recording, depending on what you want to measure, either that continuous behavior or those brief discrete behaviors. Okay, and that's what's nice about those direct observational techniques, that they're pretty flexible to measure whatever behavior you want to measure. Okay, next. Now this is a more general term, time sampling, where you're going to pick like certain times, like 15 times a day, 5-minute blocks each hour, to be able to observe whether that behavior occurs. Now if you pick like a little larger block of time, you could still do some interval recording within that, like time sample. Okay, that's more just a general thing of picking those times. How many of you do that? Like if you're like working with a kid, do you reserve like a certain part of like your hour or something like that to do some observational data recording? Like picking like a sample of time? Or how many of you more rely on the collected data that the teacher kind of collects over time? Yeah, a little bit more. I'm not getting hands anymore. I'm just, no. Now, momentary time sampling. How many know that? Okay. Keep seeing the psychologist's hand popping up there. Now, that's a very specific amount of time sampling procedure, to where you look at that one specific time, like every 10th second or every 15th second, what is the child doing? Okay. And the reason for that is that it can be a good representative sample of behavior is, I always tell my students, now think about back to whole interval and partial interval, okay? Say if you're looking at motor off-task behavior, just moving like out-of-seat behavior, and then you're using a whole interval, right? if you're needing to see that student out of seat for 15 seconds, using a whole interval, you may go through a whole 20-minute observation, and would you catch any of that behavior if all of those out of seats were 10 seconds each? No, right? Because each interval of 15 seconds, you'd be saying, nope, that's not a motor off task, not a motor off task, because it's only occurring 10 seconds out of the interval. Does that make sense? If you're using a whole interval. So you may have 0% off task. Now, if you're using a partial interval, right, that the student only needs to do it one time briefly within those 15 seconds, that would be totally different, right? You may give them 100% of motor off task behavior, okay, because it needs to just happen briefly within those 15 seconds. So that's why a lot of professionals like to use this for that more representative, like using every 15 seconds, look up. It doesn't matter what they're doing the other times. You can still use that for good narrative recording, you know, what they're doing. You can even do some ABC relations, you know. If you do like observe, record, alternate intervals, you know, like watch it that 15th second and then you can write stuff for 15 seconds and then back up at 30 seconds and then write more for 15 seconds. Or use longer intervals if you want to. But that can give you that, hopefully, a more representative sample, you know, like you're catching them at that same point, you know, at every 15 seconds throughout like a 20-minute observation. Okay, questions about that?
Would you have a
Yeah.
general guideline as to when you're doing momentary time sampling, what would be a good sample of time? You said 20 minutes, but I don't know, would it depend on the behavior that you're looking at, or is there like a standard kind of time that would give you a better sample than another chunk of time?
I'd say at least a 10-minute sample. But then sometimes you may not have that. Sometimes you may need to, if you look very frequently, if you have really small intervals, like say every 10 seconds, then you could collect some good data within 5 minutes, okay? So like you're doing 5 minutes at the end of an hour or something, okay? But if you, 10 seconds is about as brief as you'd want to go, you know, as far as collecting data. But if you make it 15 seconds or 30 seconds, then you'd want to do, you'd have to stay for a little bit longer, okay? So you have less data points. So you'd want to do, you know, more 10 minutes or 20 minutes, yeah. But usually like at least that 10 minutes. And sometimes you can blend it for your, for the work sessions or particular different lessons that the teacher's doing, depending on the age of the kid. It's nicer in the younger grades. You know, I still work in preschool part-time, you know, so whenever I look in those classes, it's nice. You know, the teacher needs to 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, you know, don't go beyond that. They last a little bit longer, but even if there's a larger frame of like reading, you know, that usually that can be broken down, right, into them different like teacher lecture, maybe small group work, independent work, where you can get 3 separate samples within that one academic area of just smaller, you know, smaller observation samples. Okay. Does that answer your question pretty much? Yeah. So you can, like I'll do sometimes if I only have 5 minutes and I want to get something, yeah, then I'll try to you know, observe and record and make those intervals very, very brief to try to get more data. Okay. Any other questions or comments about that? And the last thing are the rating scales, right? How many know the MAS? How many use the MAS? Okay. How many know the FAST? How many use the FAST? Yeah. Okay. So Carr and Duran, the MAS, they authored that, and then Iwata. All these guys are big in the functional assessment and functional analysis field. And these can help guide the formulation of other assessment methods. What's nice is if you can get a good blend of assessment methods, right? Because like they're all these things that we've just been talking about after we did the special group studies, these are all observation techniques, right? some direct observation, some indirect observation. This is indirect observation, right? Because teachers or parents are filling out this information on your child about where you can get an idea of like what is the function of the behavior, okay? When things more frequently happen during the school day. And the ABC, that's also indirect observation, right? And a lot of the other, the interval recording, like the duration and interval recording and the time sampling, those are more your direct observational techniques. But the other things are indirect observations, like the ABC, the behavior cards, the scatter plot, these forms. How many of you have how many of you have used both? Where you've able to like get a preference for one over the other? Okay. So the MAS, one advantage of that is that it mixes up the items where you answer questions about behaviors, and then from that you're able to see, depending on how frequently the student does this, you can see if like attention's the primary function, or escape, or tangible, wanting things, or sensory, okay? But the behaviors don't lead your informant, okay? They mix them all up, okay? And you can figure out primary function. The FAST, depending on what form you use, but like the one that I have, it has it all right on there. Like it's got your 16 items, but it basically says like numbers 1 to 4 are attention, or I'm not sure whether that's the way, and then 4 to 8 relate to escape. And so whoever's completing it could look at it and say, oh yeah, they just want attention. Oh, well, I'll put yes, 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 yes. So I can kind of lead your informant a little bit. But that's one disadvantage. But advantage is that it's got more information on that form that will help you set up or your assessment summary that can lead to a good behavior intervention plan. Like it talks about on that form where the teacher can write down when things happen the most frequently, when they're less likely to happen, right? How frequently the behavior problem occurs, getting you to define the behavior problem, okay? So you can pull a lot of things right from the FAST and really put into a summary that can help lead you right into your plan, okay? So it's good, it's best practice to really have both, to be able to have some direct observation information and then also information from like your ABCs or behavior cards, and then also stuff from like a FAST to do a whole FBA. Yeah?
In a school setting, who is the one that might have some of these? Is that the psychologist? I'm a teacher and I've never seen half of these things or used them, obviously. And then who would interpret them? Because even if we had a form in front of us, we're not trained to know how to interpret them.
Yeah. Do you want to answer this? Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the FAST, but ISRC has a motivation assessment scale, and it talks you through right at the end. You it says add it up here, and it just talks you right through it on there. It's very simple.
Is that a school decision as to using those, or is that a teacher decision?
I don't know.
I would, if you're doing, all of you are responsible for doing FBAs, right? Then you should have the tools available, and it should be up to you to have, and it sounds like, I'm glad that I'm covering this, because I wasn't sure, and I haven't talked to you, Sherry, enough to know that, I know there's been a lot of training on it, but then if the training doesn't lead to, you just having tools at your disposal, you need those, right? So when you're out there to be able to collect data in a wide variety of ways. So, they're easy to get. I can send a big packet of all the stuff that I give my students in behavior assessment class. I can send it and distribute to you. It would be easy. Yeah, like with the MAS and the FAST and all these different data collection methods.
I have a motivational assessment scale right here if you want to see it.
Oh, good. Yeah. So.
But could you email?
Oh, sure.
That would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I may actually have. I'm not even sure what all I have electronic copies of, but if I've got hard copies and I can send them snail mail, and then even give you some websites that have a lot of materials too, okay? So that then you can find them.
I think it depends too on ours. What happens is our school psychologists are the ones that are doing all this. They get some supplies from the departments, they don't give it to the social workers even. But then, because we specialize with deaf, when I work with hearing kids, the psychologists that work with the hearing kids do a lot of these. But the psychologists that we have that are working, they don't do it. So, I mean, that's part of it, it just depends where you're working.
You're right, yeah.
Not that we can't try to do that, but we can talk about that again. But I think that's part of it. I've noticed in different districts, they do different things.
Yeah, question over here.
I bet a lot of people know what the mass is, they just don't know that they know it. That's the thing that says if they're doing it for attention or if they're doing it for escape. Because we've talked about that here. We just probably don't remember what they're called.
Yeah.
But I think people probably know that one anyway, because we talked about it in here.
Right, and you're using, yeah, and the FAST, yeah.
I know for sure the mask, if you just Google it, it'll
Right.
pop up.
Right. Yeah, that's the nice thing now. You just like Google it in and it'll just pop up. And, and then, I mean, some of them you go into and they're blocked that you got to pay a fee, for their resources. Then you just ignore those and go try to find the free resources that are out there. But yeah, you're right. I think it's going to depend. Like here, we've got a couple psychologists here. And so it's like, but if all of you, if the psychologists have those resources in your place, then you need to have that collaboration between yourself and the psychologist to be able to share those resources, because you guys are out on the front lines collecting data and developing plans and monitoring plans, right? Right. So then, and like I think what some people are saying is right. You may be doing some of this stuff, but you may not know. Oh, that's what that's called. But you're using these different observational techniques and data. What I call it is data collection techniques. But you're right, you need to have somebody who's like that point person that has the resource, if it's your psychologist or somebody else, to be able to distribute those tools, make those tools available to you.
I think, Linda, didn't you send copies of this several years ago to everybody? Seems to me I got it from you.
I thought I did, but
Yeah.
I know that when Laura was here, the behavior doc, she also had that in her stuff.
Yeah. So it may be good even to go back and look through what you've had in your different your training, and look at what kind of tools that you had, because these are simple rating scales. I mean, give you a lot of info. Like the FAST, like I said, gives you a lot of info, and the MAS can too. And so that's okay. So this is good. This is a good stopping point, because then you're going to see. Last year we used some of this stuff in the case study that we looked at. We looked at some of the, but I think we were a little bit shorter on time. So now this year, you'll be able to see, and we're going to use, and I'm going to be asking you to pick. What? Hold. Oh yeah. Just, yep. Yeah, it's break time. But whenever we come back from break, we're going to start looking at do our first case study that will include a lot of these different techniques, and you'll get a chance to kind of work with the data and to try to help the data kind of tell you, what to get behavioral present levels and what goals to set up. Okay. Break, was it 15 minutes? Yeah. Okay.